Hello, everybody. It's my pleasure today to be chatting with a very old friend of the family, Wolfram Senger-Weiss, who is the CEO of Gebrüder Weiss. Hello, Wolfram. And I know, but I want to convey this very quickly to our audience, that your company, and I'll like your feedback on this, has been running and in operation since 1474, which is a very long time and puts long-termism into perspective. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. And I think my opening question is, we've all gone through COVID 2020, the year of the COVID virus. And of course, that may not be finished yet. But I'd like to start at the global big picture. And in your business and your clients' businesses, how was 2020? What dynamics did you see? And then we'll move into more of our intimate CE, Russia, CIS, Silk Road territory. But how was the world for business in 2020?
Hi, Danny. I'm happy to be with you on this talk. As you mentioned correctly, our company has a long history already, so it's not the first major crisis we're facing. And we also managed this one very well. If I look at the market, how we see it, I mean, we are located in Central and Eastern Europe with our main operations, but we also have overseas operations in China and US. And we have seen the first lockdown in China right after Chinese New Year, when they didn't come out of the Chinese New Year break. And this is actually what started the mess up in the global supply chain already right there. You remember all the stories that the ships were in the harbor and didn't leave the China in time, and then they didn't arrive in Europe in time. We started with a shortage in container and so on. So the whole global supply chain is a little in an imbalance ever since, and we still see today. For example, if you look at Los Angeles, you know, there's still ships waiting out there to be unloaded much longer than they should be. But on the other hand, I think what is extremely important is the global supply chain and logistic chains. They work through all times, so we could supply our customers at every level from any country, regionally, locally, and globally, more or less at any time. Some lead times were probably a little longer than usual. And then market dynamics kicked in, and we can talk a little about what happened then, and probably also the prices, and because you know, when supply is short or is shorter than demand, then prices go up, and this is exactly what has happened. And but in essence, we were actually surprised to see that the industry and our customers were actually not that severely hit by the crisis than we had expected. And we also believe that, you know, also globally, I expected much more of a dip there, but the development, especially in China, helped our industry here in Central Europe. And we had kind of a okay development with some up and downs in between. And on the other hand, we had a very strong requests on the e-commerce and home delivery side. So I mean, all this has shifted. So a lot of economic changes we have seen before have been accelerated.
No, I agree with you, Wolfram. I was just looking at some reports recently, the last couple of days, how Central Europe and even Russia are coming back quicker than even we expected just a few months ago. People were very gloomy a year ago, and the expectations have improved. By the way, just one little footnote on your own company and its history. You know, I see myself as a bit of a historian, and going back with your 500 years plus, in 1618 to 1648, your company went through the 30 Years' War. And I imagine that was quite a turmoil compared with what we're doing today. So really quite something, and congratulations. I want to divert away from our script a little bit, because you've touched on it already, and I think we should address it now. I'm talking with so many people, Wolfram, and you know, you've touched it. Commodity prices, supply and demand, you know, the global economy, and Europe seems to be picking up better, certainly Central Europe and Russia. So the demand there, and the supply is lagging. It's one of many factors. And the price inflation, if I'm sure your clients are reflecting it as well, the price inflation of their inputs and producer prices, you're at the hard end of this. My clients are saying to me, Danny, when does it stop? Now, I know that's not an answerable question, but if you could pontificate a little bit, do you seeing it getting worse before it gets better, stabilizing, or getting better soon? What dynamics do you see?
You know, there are different fields. Probably let's look at the sea freight situation, which is probably the most obvious and where we see the highest price increases. And we had, so to speak, looking back 6 months, we had all kind of hoped that with Chinese New Year this year, it would normalize a little. But then we already saw that the strong development in the economy, you know, kept the demand up. And so there was no dip and no period of recovery through Chinese New Year. And then we also had what happened in the Suez Channel, you know, blocking with the ship the whole chain there. And so it didn't help solve the problem either. So what we see today is that all 2021 is going to be more or less the same, and probably also most of 2022. And then there are some orders of new ship coming in, and this should help to release the situation a bit. But you know, now some of the ships have to go into their period of repair and have to be taken out of service just scheduled. Which was postponed through the last couple of months because there was no time in that high demand. But we reach a point where they can't push it any further. So actually, little supply will be taken out of the market even. And with now everybody talking about the economy even getting stronger, I wonder what effect this is gonna have on these logistics chains. If I look on the air freight side, it's a little different. Most of the air freight was carried in as belly freight in passenger planes. I mean, this whole market is still down by more than 50% on the long haul. And you know, as soon as this is going to come back, we're going to see a little recovery on that end. And this is probably going to normalize a little earlier. But on the other hand, you know, when you have bottlenecks on the sea freight side, this is going to increase pressure on deliveries. So more is probably going to be shifted to air freight, which is then going to increase the demand again. So, you know, the whole thing might stay on a quite high level for quite a while. And if you look, for example, into Europe now on the trucking side, you know, we also start getting into a shortage with drivers and trucks and all these things, which we have seen prior to this crisis, and which we didn't feel now for quite a while because, you know, markets have been slower, but the problems from before are kicking in again.
Interesting, thanks. And supply and demand of labor is another factor as well. I think I agree with you entirely. I think 2021 with the demand and the probably a booming economy and the recovery in the summer, I'm trying to tell clients maybe hopefully that after that, you know, Q4, it might stabilize or get better. But I heard what you just said and do not disagree with it, because, you know, you could see some dynamics for that as well. So it's certainly something, you know, companies need to factor in, and they are doing. But just to tell you and share with you, you know, it really is a talk point with a majority of companies as well. But thanks for that. And one thing for the audience, Wolfram, I know your sectors well. What proportion of the business, you talked about sea freight, air freight and trucking and so on. What proportions of your business are in those sectors kind of thing?
We do about 2/3 in overland and logistic in Central and Eastern Europe. And we do about 15 to 20% in overseas business, which is air freight and sea freight, then with our also overseas operations. And then we also have a local parcel service in Austria, which is covering the rest.
Great, thank you. Very much your history and your good experiences on Central Europe, Russia, CIS in a broad sense. You talked about the global trends that are going on there. Let's go into more detail about our region. What did you see in 2020, 21? You know, from me, I'll preface it and say a lot of our mutual clients, you know, like you said, it wasn't too bad. I'm not whitewashing it. It's been tough, of course, but Central Europe and even Russia and parts of CIS, I'm getting a lot of good corporate stories as well. How has it been for your company and your clients?
I mean, if you look at the countries, how they came along with the Corona situation, I'd say many of the countries in Eastern Europe actually did quite well and went through a less severe lockdown than some countries in Western Europe. And so things there, in most of the countries, some exceptions, but were a little probably more stable, or probably they didn't take it that serious with all consequences. So business was okay, I would say. For us, with the exception of Russia, we believe that the severe lockdowns in Russia and really sending everybody home, and this really had a strong influence on business. So we were not too happy with the development in Russia, or I'd say in Central Asia, which was more severe hit than as we saw it than in Eastern Europe. But if you look at the bigger picture, I mean, we talk about nearshoring and you know, how the big supply chain is going to change. And my point of view on that is not much. We also didn't see much of that now during this period, at least. But whatever is going to be moved closer is going to end up in Eastern Europe. So I'd say there will be rather a positive market development for these countries. For production location and so on, rather than having a negative influence with this nearshoring approaches. But on the other hand, I mean, the market that was really booming was China. And you know, when China and Southeast Asia is strong, why in hell would you move a production to Europe, you know, if a lot of your markets are going to remain there? So we don't see any of this development, and a lot of profits are also made over there. So we believe that there is not that much nearshoring going to happen as probably some politicians would like to see it. But on the other hand, what we see is that there is this move to more e-commerce, and so you know, to deal with your customers directly, you have to look into shorter lead times. And so, you know, there is more request for regional warehousing and having the products closer to the end customers. So this is kind of moving the supply chain a little closer to our region again.
Super, thanks. I'm going to come back with several things. I just want to echo what you said, Wolfram, about the nearshoring trend. I agree 100%. And again, a year ago, the view was everybody's going to leave China next week. and that didn't happen. It became very clear quickly for the reasons you said, the cost, the dynamics in Asia, but the infrastructure that's been put in, the investment our clients have put in. Just to share with you, I was speaking with a big consumer products company, the regional manager in Vienna, and a few months ago we were chatting about this, and I raised the topic with him, and his response was to burst out laughing. And he said, Danny, it's not going to happen. You know, that he was a bit cynical maybe, but we know what he's trying to say. I want to come back to the Silk Road and China dynamic more later, definitely, because I know that's something Gebrüder Weiss has looked at closely. But still want to go in a little bit deeper. We've started to touch on Central Europe and Russia. What are the, and I can sense what the answers are already, but can you elaborate more? What have your customers been asking of you that's been the same as usual, and what has been a little bit different? So has there been any new challenges or business as usual?
You know, I'd say if you look from a little further away, I'd almost say business as usual. And the big trends kind of continued. I mean, what was not business as usual, of course, is that, you know, people had to work remotely and you know, the whole way to communicate and to meet and to talk about problems and to implement new processes and so on was a little more difficult than usual. And this also led to one thing which surprised us a little. I have to admit, we thought that a lot more changes would happen through these COVID times, but actually everybody was kind of cautious about, you know, what's going to happen, and rather don't change a running system. So a lot more continued in a way it was before, rather than big changes were happening or were implemented. So probably also because of this, you know, there were no bigger changes in the supply chain. I mean, it was difficult to visit new suppliers. You know how do you do all these things if you can't travel, if you sit in your home office and so on. But there was a move into even more digitalization. You know, more transparency, more information need, and all these things. But all these are trends that have been there before.
Correct, yeah.
That were kind of speeded up a little.
I agree with you 100%, honestly. We've seen the acceleration of existing trends. By the way, when you said, you know, when you started to answer the question, Wolfram, you said almost apologetically, we've not seen that many differences. No need to apologize, and because I'm with you. And I think the big dynamic, of course, is the work from home. And the other one you alluded to is the digitalization. Many of the people we work with, our joint clients, you know, they're saying that digitalization is okay for existing relationships, but it is a challenge for new relationships and, you know, explaining innovation and so forth. I'd like to move, you know, you talked about Russia there a little bit, and, you know, Russia CIS. I know you've got a great foundation in Central Europe, and you explained a little bit about Russia, but how has Russia been, you know, the last few years? Could you elaborate more on recent changes and what you think for the future? How important is it for Gebrüder Weiss moving forward?
You know, as you probably know, Danny, we are not that of a strong player in Russia. So we have a very strong presence in Central and Eastern, Southeastern Europe. And then we moved also to an interesting area, which is the Caucasus area, which is kind of off the beaten path a little. What we see an interesting development and also market opportunities. But if we look into Russia, we have always been a little cautious, despite being listening to you talking about Russia for many years, that positively. It's a very big country, and there are big logistic challenges there.
Yeah.
So we rather have solutions for Russia with partners than with our own assets. Other than we do understand in Central Asia and in the Caucasus area and in Southeastern Europe and so on. So I'm not I don't know that much about Russia, but
No.
the developments I see there are going in two directions. One, I said Russia was more severely hit by the crisis. I think they didn't deal so well with it. But two, we always forget about this. I mean, now with this meeting finally between US and Russia today or yesterday, we start thinking about these old topics and conflicts again more. But we still have a sanction situation with Russia, and this is still kind of a problematic setup for many of the exchanges. And what we see is more concentration within the Eurasian Custom Union.
Yes.
And this also, kind of further developed now through the last couple of months. So there is more business between these countries rather than international business. With always the same exception, business between the US and Russia is booming. I'm always surprised to see these numbers because politicians talk a different language. But this is quite strong. But between Europe and Russia is quite it's not that well developing. And we also see some companies actually moving out of Russia or thinking about how to deal with this market. So this is kind of the view I have. In addition, there is one specific to our industry with Russia, which is the Silk Road connection, the train connection between China and Europe.
Of course.
And there something interesting happened. I mean, one, the connection was better established, or is now established really as the third way or mode of transport between Asia and Europe and back. Even though the percentage is still small, we talk about single-digit percentage, but it's well established now, and the prices also fluctuate with the air freight and the sea freight. This shows this is kind of a part of the same market. But what the Russians do very clever is they have allowed to put to have longer trains going through Russia rather than in the transit. So the Russian companies can put additional wagons and containers for national distribution, which more or less goes for free because the train is paid by the international customer. So this is kind of little changing the possibilities of distribution within the long distances in Russia.
Right. By the way, thanks for that. It was exactly what I wanted, your analysis of Russia. And I think, from your perspective, it's very clear and very, very helpful. I'd like to take us to a little bit more on the Silk Road, which is a key element, because I know that. We talked before about supply chains changing and nearshoring, which didn't happen. We've got the Silk Road, and you've said it's small percentage, but certainly growing. The Silk Road as well has had a lot of political analysis and commentary in the media as well. Probably critical or semi-critical, maybe even a little bit of schadenfreude. The Chinese wanted to do this and they've got problems. How do you see that? And, just in general terms, but also from your own company, has it met your expectations, and what do you see for the next 5 years?
First, I have to say thank you to the Chinese for developing infrastructure within Central Asia. And now I hope that a lot of Western companies see opportunities there and use it and use these markets, because I think they are interesting markets. There's, they're quite well developed. They're quite close to our region, I'd say, also mentally. And I think they have created additional opportunities. What I think is a pity that there is no real European answer to it, and we have difficulties politically to deal with developing this region. For us, I mean, we have tried to give logistic solution to this area, because I always try to differentiate the transit thing, so the Silk Road, the Iron Silk Road, you know, the trains going east and west, which, you know, is a good additional opportunity for some goods where it fits. But there is also this regional market, and for us, we have found two locations that are important to cover the region, which would be in addition to Russia, because Russia is per se just one big market you have to cover, and there's a lot of focus on Russia. But there is also, you know, what in former days was called the Stan countries, or the Central Asian. I haven't heard Stan in a while, actually. Probably still used, but
yeah, it's okay.
They haven't changed the name. I mean, some names are changing in there, but they haven't changed their names, so the countries still end in Stan. And there is like Uzbekistan, which is really showing a very strong development, and I believe that there are some strong markets developing in the region. And I believe that with a logistics hub in I'd say in Almaty, somewhere in Kazakhstan, you can well cover these Central Asian markets. And then you need an additional one for the Caucasus area, which is kind of a separate market. It's not that big, but it's an interesting hub. And we also see that the Southern Silk Road kind of goes through this area now, and also to cover these more southern Stan countries. It's an interesting connection. So these are for us the two directions we're heading, in addition to Russia, of course, about this region.
It's great you bring up, I was going to do Uzbekistan, you know, in recent weeks, talking with people. If you talk about Russia, then the next one usually is Kazakhstan, but then the next one is now Uzbekistan. And you touched upon it there, Wolfram, but a little bit more, please. You know, it had a lot of public relations that 2 years ago, you know, this is Uzbekistan is the future. There's always the danger it will always be the future, but that's not the cynical approach I take. I'm getting a lot of good, positive feedback, you know, realistic, not exuberant expectations. From what you're hearing from your clients and your own experience, a little bit more on Uzbekistan, is it good, meeting expectations, or disappointing?
You know, if you look back some years, Uzbekistan is a bigger market than Kazakhstan, but it was politically so big. They have more people there, and in former Russian times, it was actually a bigger market. But then Kazakhstan developed better. I mean, with all the energy, the oil and gas there, and Uzbekistan was politically extremely locked up for many years, and now they are opening, and I mean, what I hear is mainly positive stories. So I see that whoever goes there has actually positive reply. These are good people to work with, and actually also the government is actually giving positive signals, and it's not just a bubble or something. It's and it's also not so dependent on energy, which is rather rare in this region. So it's something you can more stable build on, I believe.
Absolutely, more diversified for sure. Absolutely. No, that fits in, Wolfram, with what I'm hearing, and fingers crossed. Because if it does continue and gets better, linked in with the Eurasian Economic Union, then, you know, there's the plus sides are obvious. You brought in, and you know, the Caucasus region. I have to confess, generally in our events, as you know, it doesn't get perhaps enough attention, and that you sort of implied it was small, but of course we both know if you cluster it, which I think most people do, then you get certain synergies. But I've got a feeling, Wolfram, you know more than about the region than many of our group members and mutual clients. So could you elaborate a little bit more on the Caucasus, which is, you know, where do you prefer to be? Are they all the same? What's the differences? What should we know about them?
You know, what didn't help is there was a war between Armenia and Azerbaijan just recently. So they don't like each other too much, even though everybody is seeing it as one region. And there is this, I want to say, neutral country, Georgia, in the middle. And I think the business environment in Georgia is very good. And when you think of moving there, you should really consider Georgia as a hub, even though Azerbaijan is by far the biggest market, and there is oil and there's the oil money and so on. But logistically, you can very well cover Azerbaijan from a Tbilisi hub. So it's not that big in total. And it's interesting what is happening, because this southern Silk Road to enter into Central Asia is becoming more and more interesting. So even if Caucasus is not such a big market, I mean, you could use it as a hub to also cover some of the more Central Asian countries, and infrastructure is getting better also in transit to Turkmenistan and even up to Kazakhstan. So it is developing well in this right direction. And I mean, Georgia had some political turmoil lately, but it's actually extremely stable in the end. It's a small country. Small countries are always a little problematic because everybody knows everyone, and like in the family, if somebody gets kicked out,
I hope you're not talking about Austria.
I hope I could avoid this, but
do so, please. Avoid it. Good.
But no, I think we have invested about almost 10 years ago in Georgia, and it has been a very positive development there. And I'm actually surprised that not more has happened in this direction. But the whole region is almost very much dominated by Russia, and whoever puts Georgia under Russian responsibility, not much development is going to happen there, because they don't like each other too much. I mean, they like their wine and their water in Russia, but there is some political problems there, which is not quiet at the moment, but I believe which is one of the reasons why there is probably not that much of a development. But I don't want to elaborate so much about it, but I think it's an interesting market. Also, the whole region, there's Turkey and these countries around, and let's see what the development there is going to be.
Absolutely. No, it was very interesting, Wolfram. You said you invested 10 years ago, point number one. And point number two, it was a very good point. You're surprised that others have not done so much there. And I can hear what you're saying very clearly. Thanks for that. No, very helpful. I want to go back to, as we get towards the end, I want to go back to you touched upon digital and e-commerce. And of course, it's very buzzwords. It's very key and critical to our clients. On the retail and consumer side, it's a no-brainer, and the dynamics are going on there. How has it changed? We agreed, not so much change apart from maybe home office, but obviously some other things as well. And we're seeing, I agree that digitalization e-commerce is a continuation or an acceleration of an existing trend, which is what we said. But could you elaborate a bit more on what's been happening on digital e-commerce with your customers and with your own company, how you've adapted? And again, has that been very disruptive or a little disruptive?
I mean, for us, not at all disruptive. I mean, this segment was extremely booming, and I have to say in our parcel service, we actually hit our 10-year target last year, which really got us into problems with capacity and infrastructure and all these things, because this is not a dynamic thing you can increase. What I there's very often the question: is it going to go back? Was it now because the shops were closed? Is it going to go back, and we're going to see more through retail channels again? I think for some companies, it's also a positive trend, because they can better control, how the goods get to the customers. They can directly market it to them. They can cut out in the chain. We don't see, even though now in most of the countries, shops are opening again, we don't see that much of a drop. So we believe the level is rather going to stay. And especially if you look at the bigger units, this is something we have been focusing on. In the lockdown, a lot of families bought new, sofas and kitchens and TVs and all this stuff. And nobody could go to the shop. But then they also realized, it's actually always was a big hassle to rent a truck from a neighbor and something and find somebody to help you carry, and then have your wife watching you while you try to screw it together. Always a big disaster. So, a lot of this has become more professional, and I also believe a lot of this is gonna stay. I want to add one other thing to digitalization, because in our industry there is this big discussion about digital freight forwarders.
Right.
So, do you still need infrastructure, or can we just all do it online and just have a digital solution to it? And actually, we saw that these digital forwarders came to limits. Because especially when infrastructure and capacity is cost, then there's a problem. When you're just digital, you need to control your supply, and you need to control the capacity and so on. So it also showed that there are limits to digital. In the end, goods have to be moved physical. And this cannot be digitalized. I mean, at least not today, until we have the beaming or something. So there's also, it felt much better if you have somebody you can call if something is not working, and who has some expertise and who controls some capacity, rather than having a system that says error. Please wait.
Thank you, Wolfram. That takes me, I think, very nicely, just time-wise, we wanted to keep it to about 40 minutes or so for the wear and tear of our listeners. That's our model for these. And it's been fascinating, but I can't resist. It was going to be my question anyway at the end, that, the long-term future. And you talked about beaming. I think it would be very unfair if I said, where do you think your company will be in the next 550 years? So I think I'll be a little bit unfair and say, where do you think things will be in 5 years? Or, pick your own parameters, Wolfram. We've had this change or no change, but certainly we've had COVID, which has, hit the news and done what it's done. So the region 2025, CE and CIS, or even as far out as 2030, midterm, what's your own company planning? I think that would be the way to answer it.
Thanks for the 5-year perspective, and because 2050 is now in everybody's mouth with the Green Deal, and this is actually what is having the biggest influence on our industry, and I think not only in our industry but on all the industry and the production, at least in our area, or in Europe. And let's also hope in the rest of the world that the others would also follow up with it. So these are going to be the biggest changes, I'd say, to our industry. But it's only going to be kind of a shift in the mode of transport. So, actually in the end, if we have a diesel truck or a battery truck, or hydrogen truck or whatever, not that much of a difference. Probably cost-wise, there could be a change to it. So we're now in the transition period. I'd say in the next 5 years, not very much is going to change, But also, I think, we had a global crisis now, and we needed global answers to it. And I believe the world is going to remain global. I don't think that everybody is going to be happy being reduced on the region or on their home. They now found out what it means to be, locked up. So everybody wants to go out again, and actually, I think it's gonna stay open, gonna go in this direction. For our company, I think we're in the right region. I think we can develop well. I already elaborated that if there is nearshoring, it's rather kind of get into this region than somewhere else. But I also think that the global connection, with world trade, is going to remain on that level. I don't see any real reason why there should be strong drops. I mean, we have talked about some products where prices are rocketing at the moment, for example, forestry products. There is some problem in Canada, so they're buying all the wood that there is in the world. So I don't think this is really going to change, and I don't hope for all of us it really is going to change. We're going to find probably more efficient, better ways to connect the countries, the companies, but there will always be a need for a freight forward in the end. This is what I see, at least for the next 5 to 15, 20 years. If we look into 550 years, well.
Yeah. You can leave that to the grandchildren. Yeah, good. Wolfram, I'd just like to summarize a couple of points there you made at the end. Absolutely, the Green Deal, ESG, environment, social governance. This is another thing that's coming up a lot now with the people I talk with. I've noticed it in the last few months, and it's accelerating. I speak with a lot of people every day, and it's coming up. It used to be zero, and now, I've had conversations today, and it's popping up. I would endorse what you said about the right region. I think Central Europe and Russia CIS as a region, comparatively with Latin America, Africa, Middle East, and good parts of Asia, is a good business region to be in. And that's rammed home to me every day. I think you've been implying also, I think we both agree China is not going away, far from it. And it will be a big engine of activity in and out and so forth, and those shifts will be there. So I think that's a big driver. And then you also said in the closing, and I do agree, I'm not being polite, you sort of said again, no major changes. We both know changes are going on, they're accelerating existing one. So I really do know what you mean by that. It's not sort of a naive nonchalance about it. But I understand, I did a global report on the future of the world, and I think I had 3 slides on changes and 15 slides explaining the no changes. So, life goes on, companies will have budgets, capital and finance will be generated as they are, and so on. But it's been very enjoyable to listen to your remarks strategically, big picture, and what your company is also doing operationally. I enjoyed it very much. I would say to our audience that we've had the pleasure of listening to you live on many occasions in Vienna, and we look forward to sharing this with many, many people, and look forward to the next 500 years. All the best.
Thank you very much, Danny. I enjoyed it also very much, even though I prefer to see you live. And look forward to that soon. Thank you.
Thank you.